Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a round 4 game from the 2015 Qatar Masters Open between two young players. On the white end, 16-year-old Grandmaster Wei Yi. He's paired against 17-year-old International Master Vignesh. Vignesh has only recently earned his International Master title, doing so just this past year. Many of you may already be familiar with Wei Yi and his playing style. You'll know that he's quite tactical in nature. This is a game that has many tactics in it, and this is not to say we get to see those tactics show up on board, but for certain, many of the moves played in this game are rooted in tactics. They have some tactical idea behind them, and so both players need to be very alert in this one. So with that said, let's dive right in and see what went on in this round 4 game. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. If you are a chess teacher or instructor and you're looking for a good game that illustrates many different tactical ideas, this is a good one to share with your students. Many tactical exercises can be pulled from just this one game. And throughout this video, I'll even suggest you pause the video at many points to see if you can spot the tactic. Okay, a6, bishop back, d6 denotes the modern Steintz variation. Black looks to address this pin with a piece. Castles, d4. When I see this tension, in my mind, I view this position as if it is already opened, as if the exchange already occurred. And if there is not already a great enough weight in chess, if there's not already a great enough weight placed on developing in a chess game, well, in these open positions, there really needs to be, there ought to be a great weight placed on development. And sure enough, that's what we see with these next several moves. The pieces coming out and about. Knight f6, d takes e, knight takes e, light square bishops are gone. Knight c3, bishop e7, knight d4. Not a developing move, but what is the idea behind it? How are things looking in the center? These are important questions to ask. Let's first consider the central pawn structure. Who is preferred? In this position, it's white. White enjoys a slight space advantage. e4 versus d6. I tend to view it as a 4th rank pawn versus a 3rd rank pawn. This guy is slightly further up the board when compared to his counterpart. Additionally, this knight d4 move is avoiding an additional minor piece exchange. If your opponent, let's say black in this case, they're playing with a space disadvantage. However slight it is, it's a space disadvantage. Black would have an easier time playing this position if they only have 2 minor pieces instead of 3. They're not going to have as difficult a time finding adequate squares for their pieces if they only have 2 minor pieces on board. So knight d4 avoids that additional exchange. Moreover, it eyes up this f5 square, which is an incredible outpost square for a knight, and I believe one that is that much more powerful since black is absent their light square bishop. Can't take that knight out of the game so quickly. There isn't going to be some bishop takes knight. And so how do you address a knight on f5? It's difficult to challenge, difficult to work around. And I don't know that you really can, let's say, rely upon a move like g6 to have that pawn control f5, because g6 comes with its weaknesses. h6 in particular is a square that can be pounced on by the knight immediately once he's on f5, or maybe even the bishop. So quite a tricky piece, without question, to work around this knight on f5. Moreover, the knight d4 move is freeing up an f4 advance, which is going to put a question to the knight on e5. He will soon have to answer the question, where is my next best home going to be? He's going to have to find a new home. Castles, knight f5 immediately. Rook to e8, not just any rook. It's sensible to throw a rook on this e8 square because it's half open. But if you question why that rook, well, quite often it's a good idea to keep that f8 square opened for a minor piece. Sometimes a bishop, sometimes a knight. In this game we see actually the knight be the one who makes use of that square. Okay, bishop g5 developing. f4, I pointed out, is a move that would not... White doesn't do well to play f4 prior to bishop g5, right? You have to be a bit cautious of the move order here, be a bit delicate with the move order. If you're playing f4 right now, where's he going? e3 is not really a good square. Just, you're asking for trouble, throwing it opposite the rook. So it's first bishop g5. And this comes with a serious threat already, which is to take the bishop and then take the knight. And black's kingside pawn structure will be shattered. Just as an example, if h6, knight takes bishop. You take with the rook, we take the knight. Terrible structure. And again, just making a passing move to illustrate. Knight takes bishop, queen takes, now allows knight d5, taking advantage of the pin, and a similar situation soon happens on f6. Therefore, bishop to d8, this bishop needs to be preserved. Only after bishop g5 do we have f4. Where's the new home? g6 is it. And now, what to do about the pressure on e4. This is your first, let's say, pop quiz. How to defend the pawn on e4. I'll give you two. I'll make this a multiple choice. Queen d3 or queen to f3. Which is better? One of these is better. If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video. See which of these two moves you would play. Okay. The best move, the move played in the game, queen d3. What's the issue with queen to f3? We have a tactic. Knight takes e4. What's this doing? It's undermining the knight on f5. It's undermining his support. There's no longer a pawn there. Knight takes knight. Queen takes knight. Already a little tactic to be aware of. How exactly to defend this knight, or excuse me, how exactly to defend the pawn on e4. Queen d3, how is this different? Well, if knight takes e4 now, we simply take the knight, and the knight here is actually defended by the queen indirectly, because there's the move, the tactic, knight f6. That's a check, and we're winning the queen next. Best is to take and play the two minor pieces versus the queen. So it's important, in other words, to see this position right here as, well, I need to defend both e4 and my knight on f5. I cannot rely upon this pawn as lending enough support to the knight on f5. Queen d3 defends e4 directly, and the knight on f5 indirectly. Okay, so queen c6. More pressure ensues on e4. Queen to d4 indirectly defends this square. If knight takes here, well, that's mate. Knight f8, black looks to reposition. And now we have bishop takes knight. Pop quiz number 2, let's call it. What would you do in this position? You can capture with the pawn, you could capture with the bishop. What move would you play in this position? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what you would do. Okay, a lot of you are not going to like me for this one, but it's none of the above. You can listen back to how I phrased it. I didn't say those were your only choices. If you capture with the bishop, you're running into a tactic. Knight h6. On pawn takes knight, we take this guy, and this is not fun for Team Black. If you take with the pawn, this is terrible. Queen d1, the queen's looking to come over here. It's just bad news if you're having to play with this type of structure. The key move here is knight to e6. It's important to kick the queen off of this d4 square prior to capturing on f6. I should point out one other move here. After bishop f6, knight h6, suppose black says, you know what, I'm just not going to take the knight. I'm going to play here. Well, this allows knight takes, f7 with check, king g8, knight back to h6 check. Same story, you take the knight, the bishop's captured. King goes back, and now we have e5, and this position is getting blasted open. And it's white who's going to come out on top. White is the better side here. These are important tactical ideas to be aware of. This pawn on g7 is a bit overloaded. As soon as the bishop takes here, the pawn has to watch over f6 and h6. Tricky ideas in mind with these. We have some dark square pressure being placed on black's kingside, kicking off with this knight on f5. Okay, knight e6 first, queen d3, bishop takes bishop, knight d5. This is a threat here. Knight takes bishop, so this needs to be avoided. The bishop once again revisits d8. Why not bishop takes pawn here? What's the issue? If you'd like to pause the video and figure it out, go ahead. Alright, this would be flat out loss. We have a fork of the queen and king, so bishop d8. Another piece gets involved, rook a to e1, queen d7, white relocates with queen to h3, and this is doing what? Well, for one, it's opposite the queen. As indirect as it is, there's a couple pieces in between the two queens here, but she is unprotected and quite possibly tactically vulnerable. As an example, if I'm just to make a passing move, if black is playing a move like a5, a move like knight takes g7 is already a possibility. There is no knight takes knight because you drop the queen. And on king takes knight, well, this runs into maybe a move like f5. And then maybe even f6 right away, or even some type of rook lift looking to attack the king. This is the heart that has just been ripped out of the black kingside structure, mind you. That g-pawn is especially important to the black kingside. Without him around, 4 squares, well, more than just 4 squares, but these 4 key squares, let's just say, f5, f6, h5, h5, h6 are holes without the g-pawn around. Just great weaknesses. So, something to bear in mind, this queen h3 move. Black looks to kick this knight away, does so right away, c6. Knight d to e3, bishop to b6. White gets out of the pin. One of the knights is eliminated. White moves forward to recapture, not budging with the knight on f5. Also, this knight can't go too far away. Keep in mind, if just to highlight another move to steer clear of, move like knight to c7, there's tricks like this. Knight h6 check, discovered attack against the queen. To be very careful. Black queen is unprotected. Black is tactically vulnerable. So black defends the queen, gets a new piece involved, lends support to d6, queen h4. Ideas in mind with maybe targeting h7, knight f8, a nice regrouping. The knight is there to defend. Knight takes g7. What a sharp move. A lot of time spent on this one, a good 15 minutes. Ripping the heart out of the black kingside structure. What's the idea behind this? Let's see. King takes knight. Here comes the f-pawn. This guy, once he gets here, just ton of different threats come about. Controls g7. Queen h6 to g7 mating ideas. Black has to be very accurate. Knight g6, allowing the knight to be taken right back. White declines this and says, I'm giving more weight to my pawn on f6 than I am to just give or get the material back. There's only one move here for black. It's king to h8. Any other move? King to g8 or f8, and it's a mate in 2. Queen h6, mate next. If the knight was captured in this position instead of the move played in the game with f6, if pawn takes knight, how would you recapture in this position? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video. What move would you play in this position? Okay, you would actually recapture. There's no slight trick or anything like that with how I phrased that question. If you're taking with the h-pawn, this is bad because of queen f6 followed by rook to h3, and black has to give the queen in order to stop this mate threat on h8. It's important that if the knight is captured, black takes with the f-pawn. That way on queen f6, king g8, rook h3 is not throwing a threat of mate on the h8 square. So white plays f6 instead. King h8, the only move. Queen h6, threatening mate. Only one defense. Rook g8. And now we have rook to g3. I must say that this was, my initial reaction was that it's a bit of a surprise. And I say this because I thought rook to h3, but there's a very simple defense in that of knight to f8, and everything's covered. The main thing being h7, and soon the queen will be kicked from her strong post on h6. By playing rook to g3, this basically pins the knight down to the g6 square. He can't move. If he does, it allows rook g7 converging on h7. And rook takes, we take with the queen, and that's mate. If the knight is playing here, well, we take the rook, and there goes your defense of g7. That's mate. Short story, rook g3 means the knight can now not move. Queen e8, looking to kick away the queen. Queen to f8. Rook f5. There's a very important tactic to be familiar with. After this last move, there's a serious threat. Can you spot it? Suppose queen takes e4, threatening mate here. What would white do in this position? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video. See what you would do as white. Okay. The winning continuation, the mate in 2, in fact, is to take and then give mate. So this is the idea, short story, this is the idea with rook f5, to take on h7, and then play rook to f5. I should maybe have pointed out that as soon as the move rook to g8 is played, it's very important to note a couple things, and I should have pointed it out when the move was played. The move rook to d8, rook to g8 does one thing. It's true. It defends against the mate threat. It guards g7. Another thing it does is takes away a square from the king. He no longer has this square to run away to. You're kind of stalemating, we can say, kind of stalemating the black king. And so when this happens, these ideas of removing the rook pawn and then coming over with a major piece to the h-file to deliver mate, these tactical ideas now come to light. They're now possible as soon as we have this rook g8 move. Pawn on f6 is very strong. Rook g3 it was, queen e8, rook f5, not queen takes e, but rather queen f8. White needs to keep the queens on the board. Needs to still pursue some attack. Queen h3 it is. h6. If black is not careful, white is playing rook h5, and there won't be any defense. For example, if rook here. Rook h5, and how are you defending h7? You're not. So h6 with the idea king h7 to lend some more support. Rook h5, king h7. Black has done very well up to this point with defending. How long will those defensive moves last? Let's see. Rook g5, rook on g to g5, threatening. Rook takes h6, and after queen takes, rook to h5. Black spots this tactic as well. Plays rook to h8. If, let's say, rook e8 here, once again to highlight the tactic, just to put it on board, this is the idea white has in mind. And this is big trouble for Team Black. Okay. Yeah, in fact, in that position, what would you do? The computer cites knight to h4, because if you're just taking the rook, it's once again an instance of mate along the h-file there. So black spots this, rook h8. There's now a new square for the king to run to. Rook takes h6 is now not working, because if queen takes rook here, you take the rook, and now the king gets to play here. And there isn't a way to get access to the g7 square, and that's really the only thing white can hope for, but it's covered well. Black now has good coordination, 3 pieces. The queen will not be enough in this attack. So rook to h8, very nice defensive move. Queen g4. And this is where black finally slips up. Rook to e8. They've made many good defensive moves up to this point, but this is where there's a slip. The computer cites, well, it's kind of tricky here. The computer is pointing out like all type of pawn moves like a5, c5. There really isn't a good way to improve the pieces here. Quite restricted. The rook cannot move from h8. G8 is the only square, but you need this square open. The rook came to h8 for these reasons of sacrificing on h6. The queen can't go anywhere. She needs to watch this square directly. Playing here runs into mate. Just capturing here and pick your favorite way to mate. So, yeah, it's difficult to improve the black position at this point. It's difficult to improve the pieces on the black end. They're all kind of just tied down. Computer suggests again like a pawn move with a5 or c5. It holds it at about a pawn advantage for black, but very easy to slip up. Very natural move next by black. They went with rook to e8, and this allows a very nice tactic and one that white does not miss. If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what move you would play in this position as white. Okay, the move played here was rook takes g7. What a sharp move. What is the trick exactly? Well, this is what you needed to calculate to see that this rook g6 move works. If pawn takes rook, it's a mate in 6. This is another tactic here, if you'd like to try and figure it out from this position. White to move, and mate in 6. Did you spot it? It starts out with the move. Rook takes h6. How much more material is white going to give? If king takes rook, that's mate. If the king runs away, it's check and then mate. And if queen takes rook, this is a queen versus a queen and two rooks. Well, I should say a queen and a super strong pawn on f6. We have the move queen d6, the square that was given up with the move rook to e8, by the way. King's in check. Queen blocks, that's mate. And if the king runs away, well, white scoops up one rook. If the queen blocks, that's a check, and that's mate. And what more is there to cover? King here allows check, and then finally mate. What a sharp tactic with this capture on g6. Black recognized that they would be completely lost if they take with the pawn. It's just running into a flat out mate. And so tries rook to g8. And from this point, white has an interesting decision to make, to enter a position where they're just a pawn up and the material is balanced. There's no material imbalance. There'll just be each side having a queen and rook, white having an extra pawn. Or to enter a queen versus two rook situation. White opts for keeping the material balanced, well, being just up a pawn, but having a situation where it's queen rook versus queen rook. Captures on g8, and then plays queen to f4. The alternative was this variation, taking on h6, forcing this, and then we play out this position, queen h3, queen f5, and then we slowly make progress here. This is a passed pawn white looks to approach, get these guys rolling, and play will continue from here. This was the better continuation. I'm sure there's more that white needed to consider. Recognizing the time situation, white is down a little bit on the clock here, so maybe a good practical decision to go in the direction white went, a little bit easier to play. Well, I think both situations it's easier for white to play, but in the end white is weighing that it's better to play this position here, each side having a queen and rook, white being up a pawn in this position. 4, 5, 6, yes. 7 pawns versus 6. They have to take some care over the f6 square at this point. White needs to take some care over this pawn. Black, for right now, the worst is black is basically out of the woods here. Their king isn't going to be in any trouble from this point on. So it starts to become a bit more technical at this point, finding good squares for your pieces. There was a mate threat on g2. This is easily defended. Rook f4, b3. It's getting active here. Is black. Flight square for white. Defensive e4. So things have certainly shifted. There was some attack against the black king. Black did well to dodge all of those little tactics, dodge the mate threats and such. Only down a pawn at this point. King g8, queen f3. The king is now headed over towards the queen side. Not really a way to hunt down that pawn on f6, so black is kind of just going in the direction where, white cannot coordinate well. White cannot do as well, let's say white cannot make use of this strongly placed pawn on f6, pivoting on these squares and such. The king just books towards the queen side. Queen g3, rook g5, not allowing the queen to enter. Queen f2, queen e5, h4, g3. Slight improvement for both sides with their kings. King makes it all the way to c8. And eventually, in this one, we have just the queens. After rook takes f6, okay, that pawn is won. c3 cuts the queen off from defense. Rook takes, queen takes. Now we have e5. and D takes E. So this is one more. There's only 2 more pop quizzes I'm going to throw at you in this one. This is one of them here. D takes E5 was the move played in the game. However, what is wrong with the move Queen takes C3? How would White follow up if this was the move played? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what you would do as White in reply to Queen takes C. Okay, this would lose in short order, very short amount of time, with the move Queen F6 opposite the Queen. If King here, pawn push with check, and we win the Queen next. So you may say to yourself, well, I'll just go to one of these two, and you can. However, Queen H8 check, still staying opposite the Queen, and unfortunately, no matter where the black king goes, D7 or E7, this pawn has the ability to control either one of those squares with a push or a capture. King here, we push and give check and win the Queen. And if King here, we capture with check and then win the Queen. So that's a that's a really cool tactic to be familiar with. How taking this pawn, quite tempting, but you're lining yourself up for these little tactics. The Queen can position herself with check in a spot where she is opposite the Queen like this, setting up those discovered attacks against the Queen. Black does not fall for this. Instead captures on E5, Queen takes, King F8. It's about a pawn advantage for White, but the possibilities for this game to still end as a perpetual are, I believe, quite large, very high percentage, I'd say. Queen H8, King E7. She returns. Some more checks are thrown in, and then finally White scoops up the H pawn. So he's now passed, but it's still a lot of work to get it rolling here. Queen takes C. Queen F4, King back. The pawn starts to roll B4. This is locking down on this structure here. The A6 and C6 pawns are now backward. The pawn on B4 does well to restrict both of them. King G7, King G4, and now we have an interesting moment. This game is over in just a couple moves. The next move played is Queen to C4, and my question to you is this a blunder or an okay move or something else? What's your assessment of this move here? Good, bad? What's the story with the Queen C4 move? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what you come up with. What would you do in this position as White? Okay, the move played in the game was Queen takes Queen. So is this a bad move, Queen to C4, because White is clearly exchanging queens, and we have a king and pawn ending where both sides should know this is one that could basically be calculated out to its end. Both sides should know what the result is going to be, win, loss, or a draw. Well, White actually captures the Queen, and this is a losing move. After pawn takes Queen, Black is winning. There was a mistake. There was a miscalculation by White. King to F4, what is the winning move here for Black? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what move you would play here as Black. Okay. The winning move here, and after this move was played, White resigned. F5. Game over. This is the move that White overlooked when they were assessing the exchange of queens, when they were assessing this king and pawn ending. king f4, f5, what is that doing? It's stopping white from playing g4 to connect these pawns. If something else is played like king to h6, and I believe this is what white thought was going to happen, after king h6, white was going to play g4. These pawns are now connected. And this will actually turn out to be a draw with the move f5, g takes, king takes, and just to play it out some, we would end up having this. King comes over and is there just in time. In fact, there's a key move a5. If pawn takes, the king will be quick to get over towards the corner. And a move like a3, we can first capture, and then we're there in time to draw this king and pawn ending. But by playing this f5 move first, not allowing white to play g4, this is going to be a win. White needs to be really quick to hunt this pawn down. If we just do some counting, it's going to take white 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 moves before they queen, whereas black, it will take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. White saw this and didn't even need to play it out any further. It's just something that was overlooked when white was assessing this queen exchange, or assessing that resulting king and pawn ending. Queen takes queen is in fact a losing move. King f4, f5 was something white simply overlooked, and the game ended abruptly. just like that. The game is over, and white resigned. So a sudden end to this game that was, as you saw, filled with many different tactics. Interesting game. Feel free to share what your thoughts are on this one, and leave any feedback in the comments of this video. And as usual, I hope you enjoyed it. That's all for now. Take care.